Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared Cohen, and I'm the policy advisor here at the Canadian Chamber, responsible for agriculture and agri-food policy. I want to thank you for joining us on this the second iteration of our Industrial Revolution 4.0 webinar series entitled Agriculture in the 21st Century, How Canada Can Lead by Example. I want to give a big thank you as well to our sponsors, Syngenta and TELUS Agriculture, for providing some funding for this event. And and also a quick thank you to our panelists. We're joined today by Cassandra Cotton, Vice President of Policy and Programs for Fertilizer Canada, Eric Dagenet, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Spectrum and Telecommunications Sector at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, Trevor Heck, the President of Syngenta Canada, and Chris Terrace, the Vice President of Global Strategy at TELUS Canada. And with that, we'll get started on our fireside chat portion. So let's get right to it. So there's been a great deal of digital and physical ink spilled about Canada's potential to be a global leader in agriculture and to meet the objectives set out in the report by Dominic Barton. Obviously, the world has changed a great deal since that report came out in 2018. So I'm wondering then, how, if at all, have we progressed since that time? So I'll throw it to whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I can go first. Jared, it's Trevor here.
Go ahead, Trevor.
How have we progressed? I think we've definitely seen a step change in innovation in agriculture for sure. I think whether that's new technology providers that are on the scene, or venture capital, or areas around private equity, but I think this is a global phenomenon right now, and Canada is part of it. Have we progressed faster than other countries? I'm not so sure at this point. So I think really we still have to make sure that we have the right environment and infrastructure to deliver on this.
Thanks, Trevor. Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess I would say from Fertilizer Canada's perspective, I think the agriculture industry is definitely capable. I think what we've seen coming out of 2020 and our ability to deliver to growers and increase our shipments. I think one of the issues that we're going to face is that Canadian farmers must increase their productivity, while at the same time they're being called upon to increase yields, they're being asked to decrease environmental impact. And so reconciling those dual objectives of increased food production and reduced emissions will be a major challenge faced by the agriculture industry today. And so to me, the question is whether or not government is able to move at the speed of business to actually enable the Dominic Barton report to become a reality. A quick example that I would highlight is just Canada's regulatory and policy environment is not consistent. It sometimes, definitely has some cumulative impacts for our industry. And so while demand for fertilizer products is healthy, Canadian agriculture must be protected from being undermined from competition from regions that lack the same kind of ambitious targets for environmental performance that Canada has. And I think often federal climate change policy tends to position the agriculture sector as an emitter versus its potential as a carbon sink. And so policies are then sometimes viewed as punitive towards farmers instead of rewarding them for practices. So I think we really need to be mindful that if we're going to move towards truly achieving export targets, it's essential that the regulatory development process consider competitiveness as a core component and is reflective of North American agriculture versus some other jurisdictions such as the EU.
Thanks, Cassandra. Chris, Eric, Chris?
I can jump in and just maybe top up on Trevor's comment, which I think was a really important one. I think one of the things that we've seen over the past number of years is increasing adoption of technology in agriculture, which I think actually becomes a fulfilling component of the Barton report. How do you increase productivity? And, to Cassandra's point, how do you do it in a what I believe today is a highly sustainable fashion, but we can develop the proof points behind that through the adoption of technology and the utilization of it. One of the challenges, I think, in increasing agriculture output in Canada is that we're throwing a lot at farmers today. And I'm kind of coming at this from the angle of a technology company, and I'm not an Aggie by nature. I am a telco person in terms of my history, but I think if we look at everything that we throw at farmers or producers, one of the things that really interests me is that we do have this increasing adoption of technology and software and things like that in primary production today. But in most instances, farmers that are using software, by way of example, are using more than one solution. And there's a tendency to layer on, and I think to layer on expectations and technology and software, we've really got to have a compelling argument in terms of what the economic output is for a farmer to do that. There's got to be a return on it. So I think if we want to fulfill the outcomes in the Barton report, we've got to solve the notion of being more supportive, I'd say, to farmers from a technology standpoint in primary production today is my thought on that for sure.
Thanks so much. And from the government side, Eric, anything to comment? All right, moving right on then. So I'll put you on the spot for this first one then, and this next one. So broadband access has been a key pillar of the government's agenda, a need that's only really been amplified by the COVID pandemic as we all work from home. I mean, we're holding this webinar virtually, so we all rely on internet. Eric, from the government side, can you discuss the Universal Broadband Fund a little bit and how it will impact Canadians? And then we'll get on to how maybe the agriculture side in a moment.
Thanks, Jared. So the broadband, look, at the end of the day, there's 15 million households in Canada, and 10% of them don't have access to what we consider high-speed internet, which is 50 megabits per second down and 10 up. So there's a big gap, and the gap is very pronounced between the urban and rural divides. Maybe 40% of households have access to this kind of broadband technology. It's even fewer Indigenous households. So given that gap, and given that there's those 1.5 million households that can't participate the same way we take for granted in cities, there's a number of programs. The UBF is the largest, but it's not the only one. So there's $1.7 billion that was launched in late fall. We're getting applications in actually next week for the broadband fund. We're getting applications in for the rapid response. The one thing I can say is, so far the demand has been overwhelming. We are talking to a lot of firms, across the country, and they're telling plans so that we kind of have a sneak peek of what's coming. And the good news is I think there's going to be a lot of interesting projects that'll be connecting tens of thousands of homes at once to speeds in excess of 50-10. And so we're working really closely with the Infrastructure Bank and the CRTC and the provincial governments. But it's clear that the digital divide, we need better broadband across the country. And this is the first time, this is the third broadband fund I work on. It's first time where there's actually scale. Like at $1.7 billion plus the money the bank has and the money that the CRTC has, like we're actually getting people who are thinking really. We've got firms who are saying, like I have a plan to connect like 150,000 homes in this province. Like I've never seen that before. So I think this is really interesting to do. It's really an interesting thing to do. And then beyond just what broadband has, the department, we're also working on releasing a lot of spectrum, because you can have a lot of broadband, but then you need the spectrum to do a lot of what kind of industry 4.0. The promise for agriculture requires spectrum. So there's a spectrum auction coming, and then another one in 2022 and 23. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the department right now on 5G and industry 4.0, and many of it will benefit agriculture.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. That's extremely helpful. Who wants to take it from the agriculture side first?
I can jump in if that's okay, Jared.
Go ahead, Chris. Yep.
Like to. Yeah, I think just in terms of, we think about broadband technology and agriculture, to me, it's an interesting dynamic. A lot of what we do today in agriculture is analog in nature. So it's kind of pen and paper and whiteboard and things like that. And we're moving down this path of digitization, if you will, in terms of the practices that happen on the farm and things like that. And if you think about digitizing activities, what becomes really important is exchanging that information up and down the value chain. So from farmers to processing, ultimately to consumers. And we all talk about the thought around, seed to farm to fork, by way of example, I think is one of the analogies that's constantly used. Now, in order to exchange that information, we've got to have the requisite broadband access to do so. And I think that's really important. Eric talked about the asymmetric relationship that we have today between rural and urban communities, and we've got to close that gap. But I think what's really important, and it goes back to the first question, is that if we want to be leaders in agriculture, when you think about what's happening, connectivity is a baseline, and today it's very static in nature. Agriculture will become increasingly more dynamic in terms of how we use technology. So you think about the notion of high-speed broadband, low latency as provided by 5G, and computational agriculture, and moving down that path where we're making quicker autonomous decisions perhaps 10 years from now. We've got to have the underpinnings of broadband to do that. So I would say at TELUS, we're really excited to partner with the government on funding notions like UBF, and I think it's a great policy, and I think having partners that are willing to actually deliver on their promises and employ technology and infrastructure out there is really important. The other thing I'd add on, and Eric touched on this, is spectrum. So in accompanying the funding policy, we've got to have the right spectrum policies in Canada to make sure that we're making use of all of the spectrum that is in rural communities today. So spectrum that's already been auctioned off, that's sitting there latent, I think has a lot of benefit to Canadians and to agriculture, and we've got to make sure that we're applying that spectrum and maybe even have a use it or lose it policy around it. So it's actually employed for agriculture.
Thanks, Chris. Trevor, I'm going to pick on you because your microphone's off. So thanks.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, I agree with a lot with what Chris has said. Broadband has a huge impact on both farming and also the talent that supports farming. If you look at productivity, for example, just the ability for farmers to reduce human intervention on the farm, whether it's predictive technologies, remote sensing, decision support. We also, for Syngenta, one of our most popular offers in Canada is around risk management on inputs. So growers being able to invest more in inputs, but having risk management, and that's driven really by big data, by weather data. So all of that is facilitated by having good access to data and being able to transmit that information in an efficient way. Now, one of the things that was in the Barton report was the talk about talent, and it didn't talk about it directly on farm per se, but talked about how we have to be a leader in terms of labor and talent. And I think with agriculture, this is something that COVID-19 has really pressure tested, is that we've recently just mapped our roles at Syngenta Canada. Over 2/3 of our roles can be done either from home or remotely and not in a Syngenta office. So there's this whole element of on-farm talent, people that are working on a farm, maybe not working full-time. A big percentage of on-farm income, in family farms at least, comes off-farm as well. So there's this opportunity also to tap into expertise, very educated farmers on farm, and there's also this opportunity to bring in other people into our industry from outside agriculture, which acts as an entirely new talent pool for agriculture. And really, this is all facilitated by having good broadband access. I think we all know somebody during the pandemic that, when they moved home, or it's almost like they disappeared off the face of the earth because they didn't have good quality internet, and they're still challenged to work over the last number of months here. So it's fundamental to agriculture, and it's so beneficial in many ways beyond just being able to transmit data, but also inviting others into our industry that can take it to the next level.
Thanks, Trevor. Cassandra, any final comments there?
I think everyone else covered it pretty well.
All right. Just a reminder that if to the audience that was just dialing in, that if you have any questions that you'd like to ask of our esteemed panelists, that you can do so through Slido. The meeting code is 70290. So if you want to ask questions, go ahead. It's in the chat as well if you missed that. Moving on to the next question then regarding food security. So food security and supply chain safety has become one of feels like thousands of issues really amplified by the pandemic. How can industry and government work together to ensure that Canada's farming remains high quality and accessible while maintaining safety and security in our supply chains? So who wants to take that one first?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that one since
Go
I
ahead.
didn't on the last one.
Go ahead.
So actually, Canada's fertilizer industry remained quite resilient during the first wave of COVID-19, not only on delivering on our commitments to farmers, but reaching record levels of shipments in 2020. But I would highlight the first wave there because while considering the need to prioritize economic recovery from COVID-19 is definitely important, and the agriculture industry will surely play a key role in delivering on that. Our country is very much still coming to grips with what we're facing in front of us. We're barely out of a second wave. The Public Health Agency of Canada has indicated that a third wave is coming. And as we continue to fight and vaccination rollout has been a slow start, we need to ensure a food supply that is dependable. And that means for us, for sure, an efficient and reliable transportation system. We're still dealing with significant infrastructure issues, and I think memory of blockades in early 2020 and rail strike in 2019 are not so distant for us. So really looking to the spring and ensuring that any disruption to our supply chain this spring, even if it's for a day or two, that it's understood that that has significant consequences to farmers and therefore, our food supply. So just continuing to engage with the federal government to ensure that the agriculture industry is identified as an essential service through this, and that vaccination rollout strategies reflect that, and just ensuring the flexibility of the industry to deliver product not only to farmers, but ensure our manufacturing process is able to continue on.
Thanks, Cassandra. Anyone else want to take that one?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think one of the interesting things about agriculture is when I sort of think about it from a TELUS perspective, it's a little bit like where healthcare was maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you'd walk into the doctor's office and they'd pull that manila folder up from the shelving behind and write some things down, and you'd go into the office or into the examination room and more notes would be written down. I think when we think about food in Canada, we're on the precipice of digitization today, similar to where healthcare was maybe 10, 15 years ago. But what's really important as we embark on that digitization is that we really think through how we exchange information in the value chain. So when we think about the impacts of COVID-19, I think we lost sight of perhaps what was happening, from primary production, whether that was in the fed cattle industry or otherwise, right through to the grocery stores, if you will, where consumers are buying their food. So as we start to digitize and adopt technology, I think it's important that we're working together to connect those different nodes within the value chain. I think that's really important because not so much the insight. I think the insight's great from a food safety, food traceability, food authenticity standpoint within Canada. But I also think it has value to producers if you can link the work that they're doing on farm to a consumer. And we always have these notions of value-added attributes, like the cattle industry is another good example where you've got things like you see ads being thrown at you around grass-fed beef. Well, that is a data problem, right? And that is a linking problem from production through to consumption. And I believe that as we think through the impact of COVID and the insight that it demonstrated we don't have in the food supply chain in Canada, being really cognizant of trying to link those different elements together becomes an important part of what we're trying to accomplish, I think, moving forward.
Thanks, Chris. Trevor? Yep.
Yeah, I think for me, Jared, really, I think I'm pretty happy with the way this last year went when you look at the overall security and quality of the food supply in Canada. Overall, I think some real positives that happened is a lot of Canadians reconnected with their food. And a lot of that was around, being at home and having the chance to do more cooking and those types of things. But it's also more appreciation for food supply chains as well by the consumer. And I think what's really interesting is if you look at the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, survey results recently, they saw a 12% increase in consumer confidence in our food supply. So there's a lot of positives that have come out over the last number of years. I think as a exporter, and also the Barton report was also doing more primary processing in Canada as well. We have to do a better job of telling our story around quality. I think back to Chris's point, the opportunity when we look at digital advancement in a number of value chains, particularly the high value crops, for example, there is already very robust digitization of those value chains. But I think as we get more advanced with digital, what we're going to be able to do is start to articulate our value as a Canadian, as a food provider through the data that we have, because really we have high quality food supply, and we've done quite well from a security perspective.
Excellent, thanks, Trevor. Eric, anything to add from the government side?
Well, yeah, on security, that's a bit outside of my bailiwick, but I can say that network performance over the last year, when the pandemic hit, there were some nervous people in government and also within some of the larger ISPs. But I have to say the networks of the large ISPs responded really well to the significant increase in traffic starting kind of last March and April. So I mean, I'd be remiss not to kind of point out to the fact that the large ISPs, the ones who have facilities based that invest in networks, their networks have performed remarkably well throughout the pandemic. Obviously, we talked about there's still gaps in how those networks reach out into rural areas, but the networks have worked reliably well and have been remarkably resilient. So that is something, and we've been working very closely with them on this throughout the pandemic. But that is something I think I should point out to people, and TELUS can take that back to the others.
High praise. Let's move on to another pressing issue, and that's climate change. So let's talk about sustainability specifically. Obviously, climate change is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and you sort of just mentioned that earlier, Cassandra, I know. And the agriculture industry has continued to demonstrate innovative practices to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So how have industry partners demonstrated leadership in building resilience and contributing to the fight against climate change?
I can start there, Jared. I think I'll go back to what Cassandra said a little bit earlier, was around thinking about farmers as the solution versus a problem. And I think farming offers a real opportunity for climate change. In Canada, we've got a significant land base. We have a significant opportunity to capture carbon. We also have a significant livestock herd, and there's a lot of opportunities around feeding efficiency. The digital tools are going to help improve the efficiency to be able to capture some of the data that's required going forward to be able to produce sustainable results going forward. And I think if you look at protocols, also the carbon market is heating up. We don't know exactly where it's going to land. There's a lot of recent enthusiasm which has come out in the US now with the new administration. But what we do know is that there's going to be opportunities for farmers going forward. And some of the tools that are going to be available are going to help manage some of the protocols and be able to participate in some of those new markets. So I think a lot of it's about mindset at the start, is thinking about farming as this huge opportunity for Canada from a climate change perspective. But we cannot look at it from a sort of increasing costs for farmers, because that's going to have a negative impact on their ability to help out on this issue.
Thanks, Trevor. Cassandra?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was exactly the point I was making earlier, in that what we need now is to look at turning carbon from a liability to an asset. And I think that's a change in the way the government's looking at this as well. So over the last decade, the fertilizer industry has invested significantly as it relates to best management practices in scientifically verifying for our nutrient stewardship. And so essentially they're just suites of practices that focus on source, rate, time, and place. And the practices move from basic to advanced levels and include things like, soil sampling to determine what kind of rate you would apply, banding fertilizer under the soil versus broadcasting, selecting new innovative products. There's lots of positive research coming out on positive environmental effects on enhanced efficiency fertilizers, slow and controlled release products. So these practices are happening across Canadian farms. What's missing is the accounting of these practices. And so, we do believe that there's a 4R climate smart protocol that has been developed over the years that has a potential to reward farmers and not, punish them for their environmental improvements. I mean, protocol development has not come without its issues. We've had, 10 years of issues with the protocol in Alberta. But I think a lot of new digital tools that weren't originally envisioned at the outset of protocol development could be used to track environmental metrics and not just yield, as has been previously the case. So, I mean, coupled with an increase in carbon price, there is a significant opportunity for growers here that can potentially earn verifiable credits and be rewarded without the red tape and paper burden that I think has required kind of a lack in success to date.
Thank you, Cassandra. Chris?
Yeah, so that was, Cassandra, that's probably one of the best summaries I've heard, and I've been on so many of these different calls that talk about carbon and sustainability from an agriculture standpoint, but I think you nailed it in terms of, and I'm going to paraphrase because it sounded so good, but just the notion of there are really good practices out there from a production standpoint. The manner in which we capture the information around it, I think, is our gap today. And adoption of technology to do so, I think, will go a long way forward. I love the idea of accounting from a carbon standpoint. I do think that's a gap. A lot of the speculation in terms of the impact of agriculture today, and I think actually getting that data in place will make a big difference. So I really like your commentary there and how you characterized it. I think it was totally appropriate.
Eric, anything to add?
I mean, look, every sector of the Canadian economy is going to have to contribute on the climate change front. I think the interesting thing that I've been seeing recently is a number of studies, WTA and others, talk about how better digital infrastructure and 5G deployment can actually help in fighting climate change and being more productive. So I think that's an interesting angle to what we're doing. I mean, obviously we're building out fiber as far as we can for citizens and for access and accessing better technologies. But I think it'll have a really good impact on climate change, as well as on connecting people and connecting talent. And that's something that is increasingly becoming, that people are studying and kind of being able to show the metrics behind this. Otherwise, we're not the department that's primarily responsible for the agricultural industry, but we have data that show that beef producers, for instance, I was being told before this that we're producing as much beef as we were 30 years ago, but the carbon footprint is 30% less. So there's obviously been a lot of investment in the agricultural area to reduce carbon footprint, and this government is there to support going further. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Before we just get to the final couple of questions from the fireside chat, just another reminder for those logged on, if you have any questions, to please provide them through Slido. The code is 70290. That's at sli.do. Let's talk about talent for a moment, because this seems to be a recurring issue, issue, in terms of perhaps reskilling or upskilling workers to face these new digital opportunities. So I'll throw it to whoever wants to go first, just in terms of what you're seeing or what you think it could happen from there.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Jared, I think one of the opportunities that I think things have changed, I guess, since the Barton report from an agricultural perspective. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about upskilling and trying to bring new workers in. Really, I think agriculture has the potential to attract a lot of incredible talent into the industry. Historically, well, one thing about Canada is we do not have a very mobile workforce. There was a study that Ipsos completed that said only 1 out of 5 Canadians is willing to move for a better paying job to another province. So what it means is we don't have a very mobile workforce, but what we learned during the pandemic is a lot of these roles can be done from different locations. And the opportunity there is also where we have roles located in certain markets where we need. They need to be on the farm, or, for example, or they need to be in a specific location. What it does is it's not going to dilute that talent pool. We have the opportunity to tap into other scientists, for example, people involved in digital that are in other markets, in other industries that haven't fared as well during the pandemic. And this is a huge opportunity for agriculture. But what we can't do is we can't be thinking that things are going to go back to the way they were. We have to, as an industry, we have to step up and invite people into our industry. And I think what that provides is not just opportunities for people in markets that are, say, in cities, for example. It provides opportunities for others that are going back to the farm, whether they want to be involved 100% in farming or part-time as well. I think it's our opportunities as leaders and in government to step up and invite people into the industry.
Thanks, Trevor. Any other comments? Oh, sorry, Eric, I see you you have your physical hand raised. Go ahead.
Harry or Eric? Oh,
Eric.
Me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so look, I don't know if this is applicable to the ag industry as much, but the way you're talking about it, I think it is. I remember a couple of years ago working on the global skills strategy, where we basically reformed the way that highly skilled immigrants can come into the country on a temporary basis. Basically, there's a 2-week turnaround time for people who are in high demand NOC codes, of the National Occupation Codes. And the data that we've seen so far, so one is, the last I saw, there had been about 30,000 people that had come in through this stream with a 2-week turnaround time. And they in turn generated about 10 times as many jobs for Canadian citizens. The fact that the high tech firms were bringing in, one exceptionally talented individual from another country was leading to significant job growth in Canada. And so, I mean, to the extent that the ag sector needs, the high tech talent that is currently residing abroad, I'm wondering if they are aware and if they are making use of this new global skills strategy visa, which has been kind of a game changer for a lot of industries in the tech field, and ag is in many ways adjacent to tech.
Excellent. Any other?
I think to Eric's point and Trevor's, I actually think I'd go a step farther than adjacency. Like, I think agriculture is a high-tech industry. If you think of the adoption of technology and the adoption of software and digital and managing networks and connectivity. And I think, some of the things that we've done in Canada around, the partnership between industry, academia, and government, I think are things that we need to continue to do. And that would be, whether you're looking at the different innovation superclusters that we have across Canada that are spurring innovation, or the investments that we're making in agriculture academics. One of the things that we do at TELUS is we partner very closely with Olds College because they've got a working smart farm. And I think having demonstrable examples of innovation and application of technology helps inspire kind of what that next generation of talent needs to look like. And if we can channel them through the right infrastructure from an academic standpoint, I think we better position ourselves in Canada for meeting the needs of technology and agriculture as we move forward here.
Excellent. Great comments. And I see now that the questions are flooding in on Slido. So thank you everyone for inundating the Slido app. Let's kind of put you here a little bit on the spot, Eric. The target set by the government is connectivity for 98% of Canadians by 2026, and then the balance by 2030. So given the speed of digital technology advancements, 6 or 10 years is a lifetime, quite frankly. So how do you think rural Canada and agriculture can really wait that long, or how can we fill that gap in the interim?
That's a great point. I mean, we are at I guess we're in a situation where there are some technologies that can do the job a bit quickly. I mean, at the end of the day, bringing broadband is an infrastructure project. And so, 80% of the cost ends up being a civil engineering. You're building towers, you're trenching, you're stringing wires, radios on the end of towers. So, infrastructure takes time. There's permitting issues, there's consultations with Indigenous groups, there's environmental considerations. It does take time. I think, though, the 2026, there will be a push with industry to see what they can do. There will be a decision at some point between, I think a fixed wireless kind of connectivity is probably the one that can go up the fastest. Fixed wireless can't deliver gigabit speeds. And so there will be choices in some cases between, choices that will have to be made between delivering, 50-10 quickly versus maybe waiting a little bit longer and getting a gigabit connectivity. And whether or not the industry is capable of delivering it, it's interesting. There's one province in particular, which I won't go into. I think we'll be following what's going on there in the next few months to see how much we can press to get things done more quickly in this space. But at the end of the day, it's like any other infrastructure project. You have to have the people who are prepared to do it, so the talent to build it, the infrastructure. I'm hearing some people saying, fiber, it's getting increasingly difficult to buy fiber and to line up work crews for the build season in 2021 and 2022 because everyone wants to build these out. So yes, definitely going to be a big push, and there are some interesting models that are coming out because you're right. I mean, 2030 is a long time. You don't have broadband.
Thanks, Eric. Anyone from the industry? Trevor?
Yeah, I think it is a long time, and actually the numbers, while it seems, when we start talking about high percentages of the population, I start to think that it's really challenging for farmers because you could be a farmer that's 30,000 acres, you're a large operation, you're really important to the local economy, and you could be. Because one of our advantages is we have a lot of acres and we have a big area. One of the disadvantages is if we have to cover that with broadband, it's challenging. But I see that those kind of individuals are the ones that I worry about because they're overrepresented in agriculture, but underrepresented from a population perspective. So for me, that's why we really have to focus on enabling equal access and thinking about industries as well, because if we do want to take agriculture to that level, that's the types of things that we're going to have to do. We're going to have to target some of those rural areas to take these farmers to the next level.
Agree. One thing I should mention as well is when you are thinking about broadband, there are some new technologies when you think of the low Earth orbit satellite constellations that different players are putting together, including Canada's own Telesat. These do have the potential of addressing some of the connectivity issues to the last 2-3% of Canadian households, and that's exactly it. And some of the one of the most one of the toughest places to connect in the country is rural Saskatchewan. And we talked to the Saskatchewan government in SaskTel. You know, the density there, the farms are so big and the population density is very low. It makes the economics of bringing a wire, a fiber optic cable to the farm, you know, really challenging. With some of these low Earth orbit constellations, you will be able to get, I mean, I think right now the beta test, Starlink is getting over 100 megabits per second in the most rural and remote areas we have. And Telesat is promising similar results with the low Earth orbit satellite. So I think it'll be a mix of technologies to address the particular circumstances of these very large farms and very low density areas.
Thanks,
Just
Eric.
to comment on Eric's point, I agree. I think it will be a combination of technology, whether it's fixed wireless or whether it's LEO or whether it's fiber. I mean, fiber obviously being the gold standard, I think, in connectivity, but challenges are. I think the other thing we need to not lose sight of as well is if we're thinking about infrastructure build, there is the wireless and telco connectivity side of it, but there's also a power component too, and getting power out to rural communities to actually enable that is a key element of what we need to think about as well.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to move on to another topic, well, related topic. One thing we haven't really talked about is kind of cybersecurity then in the agri, especially in this, as this is a burgeoning field. So the question of then how can we maintain that kind of security in this sector? Who wants to take that?
Feels like a question for me, Jared.
Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think obviously as we move into multiple networks and I think more importantly data, if I think about the type of information that a farmer might digitize over time, whether it's, you know, a crop plan or input costs or, you know, projected yields or marketing of their grain, you're really talking about a business plan. It's highly personal information in my mind that they own. So I think everything we do has got to be sort of security by design or secure by design, and that extends to the devices that we put on a farm and what they connect to. The challenge today is we've got so many different connectivity options out there and software options to kind of button that all up is challenging, but we've got to go in with that. You know, I think that starting point that the data is owned by the producer. And it's protected in a way, say you look at a medical record by way of example, and then on the IoT side, whatever plugs into that system has got to be secured by design as well for the producer.
Thanks, Chris. Any other comments, Trevor?
Yeah, I think it's a really great point that Chris makes. I think that, you know, farmers are just like regular consumers in that they want to make sure that they have confidence in the companies that they're working with, that they're going to respect their data and they're going to respect their personal privacy. So from my perspective in an industry, that's something that we will still have some work to do, is to build that confidence level up, because one element of this is the whole, there are going to be some opportunities created for farmers out of the digital arena and also out of the big data area, in terms of ability to manage data on their own farms and take their operations where they want. So for us as an industry, we have to make sure that we really reinforce the data, the confidence in data and personal privacy, because it'll be fundamental to getting that take up in farm and industry going forward.
Thanks, Bob. Eric, Cassandra, any comments?
Totally agree on the importance of the consumer and citizens having confidence in their data. And, you know, ISED has introduced changes to the PIPEDA Act, which protects personal information and data that's collected by the private sector. This is a key element in the digital charter, and we recognize that this is an important part of this. And we actually work quite closely with telecom companies. We have a committee called CSTAC, and we work very closely to monitor the security, the cybersecurity of Canadian networks. And this is, you know, we don't tend to talk about it a lot, but there's a high degree of collaboration taking place between telcos who otherwise compete fiercely, but on cybersecurity, there's a lot of collaboration taking place behind the scenes, and that's working really well.
Excellent. I guess we'll, just looking at the time, we have about 10, 12 minutes left, so there are lots more questions to get to. So thanks again, everyone, for putting those into Slido. We're talking about consumer confidence, and we've noticed that I think in a lot of sectors it's increased in a lot of ways with COVID, especially, or at least consumer probably awareness. But at least in the ag side, the more people seem to be removed from agriculture, the less kind of overall awareness or perhaps understanding that they have. So I'm kind of curious to know maybe like what the government or how government and industry can collaborate on raising awareness, and also how maybe what kind of actions government is taking to increase the awareness on agriculture writ large.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different ways that this is happening. I believe you are starting to see a lot more activity by industry in terms of almost taking people to the farm digitally. A good example would be, Crop Life had Real Farm Lives, for example, which is profiling some farmers in different parts of the country and kind of showing what they're doing day to day and what their lives are like, and many different kind of cropping type scenarios. So I look at that as something that, if you look at various parts of the industry, that we're going to have to do, because it's going to get harder and harder to be able to get people to the farm. So we're going to have to bring the farm to them. And I think what it's done, it really reinforces confidence with consumers when they have a chance to personalize their food. And a big part of reconnecting to food, and what we saw during the COVID period, was people connecting to their food. But it's much easier to connect when you have a farmer to connect to. And we've also seen through the research that in Canada, farmers are considered to be very credible, probably one of the most credible in the value chain. So it's very important as an industry that we look for opportunities to take people to the farm, even though it's probably going to be virtually or digitally.
Anything else, Cassandra?
Yeah, I think that generally the need to promote Canadian agricultural goods as the most sustainable in the world, whether or not that's, with chemical fertilizers versus organic fertilizers, I think is something that we need to do in general, kind of recognizing the technological advancements that the sector has made. And in reality, Canada's agricultural environmental footprint is among the lowest in the world. And so I think the public getting a better understanding of how technology has advanced agriculture from that standpoint is important. And I think also there's something to be said about bringing a greater understanding of agriculture to our youth, and ensuring that that they have a better understanding from a younger age. And certainly the fertilizer industry engages in Nutrients for Life and doing school and community gardens to ensure that the kids understand where their food comes from, and starting at a younger age to really build that relationship with food, I think is important.
Excellent. Thanks, Cassandra. Touching on the local piece, I mean, an old adage in politics is anyways, that is all politics is local, but then also I think I can sort of transfer that to all food is local, especially as we try and the buy local campaigns and maximizing local like say farmers markets, or so how can, or do you foresee affordable innovation and technology for small scale growers? We often talk about the large producers and processors, but what about the small scale growers in terms of increasing their productivity and efficiency and product and viability? Trevor?
Yeah, I think definitely we will see that. And one of the things that you're starting to notice more globally is the focus on smallholders, the really small farmers in some of the developing markets. And Chris talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of the layering on of technology and how complex that can make it for the user. what we're starting to see is in some of these emerging markets and smallholder areas, is people are being quite innovative in terms of having easy technologies that are providing very quick results. It might be in decision support or finance, for example, and growers are adopting it quite quick, happening for smaller farmers. And I think that definitely sort of the whole buy local area, I think we can do a better job in Canada talking about what that also means. I recently did a bread baking video on LinkedIn, and people don't think of cereals as being buying local, but when you're based in Calgary, it's buying local to me. So I know farmers that are growing cereals. I think it's an opportunity for us to reconnect people back to some of those commodity crops as well, not just vegetables and fruit that we normally would consider as part of buying local.
Excellent. Thanks, Trevor. So we're talking about youth and talent. So how can we encourage more youth or like people who don't want to traditionally enter into the ag sector? How can we encourage that kind of workforce upskilling? Anyone want to take that? Trevor?
I can jump in quickly. Yeah, I think there's a couple opportunities. If you look at, prior to university, there's a number of initiatives, that really start to reinforce agriculture in youth. 4-H is one of those. And, what can we do as ag in the classroom, for example, is another elements where, as industry providers, we can facilitate and, volunteer and participate in those areas. It helps develop people in agriculture, prior to getting to university. And I think back to the comments that I had around talent, now is our opportunity to start to go tap into those, university talent pools. There will be people looking for jobs. They'll be looking for work outside of probably some of the industries that they originally thought. So for us, it's that opportunity to go out there and tell a story. Now, one of the things we've seen when you're talking to youth is that your sustainability story is very important to youth in terms of what do you stand for as an organization or as an industry. So we have to be able to be ready to tell that story when we're asked, because that age of a future worker, the ones that are just coming out of university or in final stages of university, are going to ask our industry leaders those questions, and we have to be ready for it.
I agree with those comments by Trevor, and I think it's really important as we think about bringing youth in, is that agriculture is a digital industry. It is a AI-driven industry. It is a machine learning-driven industry. It is an industry that is becoming more and more rooted in the adoption of technology. And I think, depending on the lens that you look at it through, if you do take that lens, it opens up a whole new group of potential youth and others to come in and participate in the industry and advance it through innovation. And I think part of the narrative that we have to project around agriculture is that it is a technology industry, and it's becoming more so today. And I think doing that opens the doors in terms of the types of individuals that are involved in agriculture. And I would also say it inspires more people to be involved in agriculture, which I think is an important component of what we're doing here.
Cassandra?
Certainly, I can give an antidote of my own experience. I, grew up on, my grandparents had a mixed farming operation in Prince Edward Island. A lot of times the joke is the rotation was potatoes and potatoes, but it wasn't. However, my memories of that was, playing with the newest litter of kittens. So, I don't necessarily come from a farming background, but a communications background originally, and 10 years in the ag industry. From the perspective of an association, I didn't really realize the breadth of opportunity that agriculture provided. And like Chris and Trevor indicated, really, I think it's important that we highlight the strength of the industry, the reliability of the industry in terms of high-paying jobs. I think a lot of people think of the ag industry as you have to be a farmer, but there's so much more to it than that. And really highlighting, I think, especially for the younger generation, the role that agriculture plays in feeding the world, and really feeling proud of that as an opportunity.
Thank you, Cassandra, and thank you, everyone. All right, so we have time for probably one more question. It's 2 minutes just before the top of the hour. So I'll invite you to be quick. If you had to use a magic wand to take advantage of any existing government regulations or processes or trade agreements or any sort of systems that are causing delays in any sort of implementation of accelerating our agriculture outputs, or removing any barriers to implementing solutions in the Barton Report, what would it be? A good one, I know.
That's a big
Trevor?
one.
Go ahead.
I might identify two really quickly.
Go for it.
Again, I'm like it's like I'm beating the drum here. Environmental regulations and the economy must go hand in hand. If targets are going to be set to reduce emissions, they need to be grounded in science and based on emissions intensity, considering emissions per unit of crop produced to maintain agricultural exports. It's imperative. And incentives for growers, such as, national carbon market or carbon cost credits under things like a FORA protocol for farmers to participate, will accelerate innovation for our industry.
Thanks, Trevor.
Yeah, I agree with those key points. For me, I would add a couple, and it's really looking at equal access for farmers to digital infrastructure. For me, looking at it more from an industry perspective than just from a population metric perspective, and also just making sure that we do everything we can to take the talent in agriculture to the next level.
Thank you. Chris, Eric, Chris, yep.
Yeah, I would certainly look at the carbon credit infrastructure in Canada as a way of incentivizing the adoption of technology. And I think that would be one. And then the second, I would be remiss if I didn't say, and following on Trevor's comment in terms of equal access to digital infrastructure and connectivity, I really think adjacent to the funding policy, looking at the spectrum policy to make sure no spectrum goes unwasted in rural communities, or unused, pardon me.
Thank you. Eric, final words?
Well, look, I mean, I think access to digital technology is important. Also, it's solving the tech adoption kind of conundrum. I mean, that Canada writ large is facing. For years now, we have statistics that show that Canadian firms tend to underinvest or invest less in tech and equipment than their U.S. counterparts. Part of it is in relation to size, but I think it's, how to convince Canadian firms to invest more in technology and to adopt technology. And a number of things tried, some have worked, some have worked a little less, but to me it's solving that. How do you convince a firm to invest time and energy into a technology, and to convince them that this is going to yield results for them? That's something that it's not just agriculture, it's writ large. A number of industries are facing the same thing, but I think it is the big differentiator between us and the United States when it comes to productivity. And rather than fall behind, we need to solve this if we want to be a more productive economy. Excellent.
So with that, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Chris, Trevor, Eric, and Cassandra for joining us today, and thank you for all who were able to make it. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. I certainly learned a lot over the last hour. Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and stay safe.